Hello and welcome to the Weight Loss for Women Over 50 Masterclass series. Dr. Joan Ifland is in the house. She has been creating breakthroughs in recovery from food addiction from 1999 with her first popular book in 2018, her textbook, Processed Food Addiction, Foundations, Assessment, and Recovery, was released by CRC Press. She has been selected for her expertise by Oprah Winfrey Network, Martha Stewart Wedding Magazine, Fortune Magazine, U.S. News, and World Report. So she founded the Online Addiction Reset Community, ARC, in 2018, www.foodaddictionreset.com, the Facebook group Food Addiction Education in 2014, and foodaddictionresources.com in 2014 provides free support. So, Reset Week is the first online live video program for withdrawal from 2018. ARC Manager Training is also a program training future addiction reset community leaders. You have been a busy girl.
I got a great team. I got to tell you, when people come through our programs and they finally throw off the burden of processed foods, they're ready to get to work. They're not tired and brain fogged anymore. And we put them to work. So it's really a lot of fun.
I love it. So, Dr. Iflin is the lead author of the first scholarly description of processed food addiction and definition of addictive foods. So, Dr. Iflin earned her PhD in addictive nutrition at Union Institute and University, her MBA at Stanford Business School, her BA in economics and political science at Oberlin College. She also resides in Seattle. So, she is here to tell us the truth about weight loss and remission of health problems. Welcome, Dr. Inflin.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very, very glad to be here. There's a lot of new research. We're going to be talking about breakthrough topics, and thanks for getting this out.
Yeah, I love talking to you. So I always ask you about your story and how you got here. So tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get started with all of this?
Well, there's an early story and there's a mid story, and now there's a late story.
Oh boy, you tell whichever one you want.
The early story is that I grew up in a very dysfunctional household. Both my parents were angry people, and they weren't able to connect with me or nurture me. I grew up feeling dislocated and lost, really, and unwanted. I was an unwanted child. I was the second girl, and there was only supposed to be a boy and a girl. There weren't supposed to be three children to take care of. So I developed a lot of coping mechanisms, if you will, trying to be an achiever, but not trying to be a nuisance, and trying to be invisible, but accepted. It's very complicated growing up. Our household, even in the 1950s, I'm going to be 72 in a couple of weeks. Even in the 1950s, our house was packed with processed foods. My mother kind of fell victim to this idea that modern women didn't cook, and she sure wanted to be a modern woman. So there were processed dairy products in our house and lots of sugar and flour. And it was a volatile household. People could get into a fit of anger at the drop of a hat. Okay, fast forward 40 years, and I have my own children. And I'm terrified of raging, but I do it. I don't want to be raging, but I do it. I've got this prestigious MBA, but I'm not using it because my allergies are so bad and I'm tired and brain fogged all the time. So I'm yo-yo dieting, losing and regaining 30 pounds regularly. And I'm using restricted calories. So I came to the end of 1995, and a little voice in my head said, you can't do that again. You can't restrict calories again. So I was in a support group for miserable personalities. And A woman in there heard the sugar driving my raging.
Mm.
So she stopped me a couple of times and suggested a book on food addiction. Well, I was in kind of a thin phase. I couldn't figure out why she kept telling me that. But at the end of the year, I'd regained the weight. So I went and got the book. Didn't read the book. I just went to the food plan. So I started following the food plan January 1st, 1996. And it did one big thing. It eliminated sugars and flours. So any kind of sweetener and then any kind of flour, whether it was wheat flour or rye flour or rice flour or bean flour or amaranth flour, or just any kind of flour was eliminated. Well, within 4 days, I started having these incredible experiences. My cravings went away. I remember going to kindergarten with cravings so intense that I thought, oh, they're going to teach us how to tell time. Oh, good. I'll know when the chocolate milk is coming. It's just like everything centered around food, even at age 5. So the craving stopped. January 4th, 1996 was the first day I think I spent not thinking about food. I was free. I was liberated from thinking about food. I didn't know that was possible. And that day, the brain fog went away and the bloating stopped. And I wasn't tired. I didn't feel like I had to take a nap in the middle of the afternoon. Well, today I know what happened. Processed foods are inflammatory and they inflame the brain. And we experience that as brain fog. So that stopped. January 4th, 1996, it just stopped. I lost 2 pounds that week without being hungry, which shocked me. And the next week it got even better. The allergies lifted. So again, processed foods are inflammatory. And everybody said, oh, these are airborne allergies. You're allergic to pollen and things in the air. Nope. I was being inflamed by processed foods and my eyes were swollen and my nose was swollen. Well, that week, my lifelong sinus infection cleared up. Processed foods block immune function. Who knew? I have probably been to a dozen doctors for these chronically infected sinuses. Not one ever said one word about my diet. Allergy doctors since I was a little kid. Not one ever said anything about diet. So you can imagine I was excited. I felt like I was winning the lottery every day. But it was January 18th. So it was a mere 18 days into this process. I realized I hadn't yelled at my family in 3 weeks, about 3 weeks. And I knew immediately it had something to do with the food. This is pre-internet. I went to my support group that weekend and I said, do people become less irritable on this food plan? 20 heads. Uh-huh. Dang. You know, the personal
Wow.
therapist and the women's healing group. And this was my second of 4 12-step groups, all of that. And then, of course, I thought immediately about my parents and that terribly hostile environment that I grew up in. And in that moment, I just thought, I want everybody on this planet to know what processed foods do to people. So over the next 22 years, I tried 14 major approaches to getting people to stop. Now, in my own household, I gave my family a list of clean foods. And I said, I'll get you all of these foods you want. I gave them a list of processed foods. I said, I'm not going to give you these anymore. What you do is your business. And the children's grades went up and their athletic performance went up. And their popularity went up because they weren't irritable. They were always the nicest kids you could talk to. It was astonishing. And of course, everybody in the family lost weight. Who knew? I didn't fight with them. I didn't monitor what they ate. I just controlled what I could control, which was what I made and what I gave them. And then what I allowed to be in the house. They were not allowed to bring processed foods into the house. And it worked just incredibly well. People think they can't help their overweight children. That is not true. You absolutely do not ever fight with somebody about their food. They're eating something, oh, they're eating it. It's going to make them sick. They'll notice. They'll develop their own aversion to it. But if you fight with them and divert their attention to you, they'll miss the lesson. They'll think it's you trying to control them instead of noticing that when they eat these processed foods, they get a stuffy nose and they get a stomach ache and they want to pass out. And it's very, very unpleasant. That kind of association will build aversion and the kid won't want it. So over 22 years, I wrote a popular book. I gave away a lot of handouts. I did a PhD program. I did my internship in a church. I wrote papers. I wrote chapters. I had a prepared meal company. I had a daily phone call. I wrote a textbook. None of those things worked, except the church program. That worked. I went there every week for 2 years as part of my doctoral program. And those people got better and they were able to stick to a food plan. And now I know why, because it was a community. So keep fast forwarding. When I wrote the textbook, I made 2 breakthroughs. One, commonly people have severe cravings. And that is why people eat fattening processed foods when they don't want to. Because the cravings from the reward centers back here in the midbrain are putting out more neurotransmitter. They get control of behavior. They're putting out more neurotransmitters, so they have more control over behavior than the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is not getting blood supply because it's going back to the craving pathways and the stress pathways and the fear of famine pathways from dieting. And the frontal lobe is like the least survival oriented part of the brain. So it's low man on the totem pole. It's the lowest priority in the brain, and it just doesn't get blood supply. And so that's why you don't have your decision making, your memory, your learning, your attention span, your problem solving, your impulse control. It's because they're all up here in the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is not getting blood supply. Well, dang.
Yeah, that's a light bulb right there.
Okay. So 2 things. One, the cravings are severe. It meets the criteria for a severe cravings condition. And people have been deeply traumatized. There's a center in the back of the brain here, the kind of the anxiety center, and it's hyper activated. And so it's triggering the craving pathways, which are also the pleasure pathways. And the pleasure pathways are triggering the stress. There's this little dance, this lethal, fatal dance going on between the craving pathways and the stress pathways. And they're aggravating and provoking each other. The mechanical issue. But I knew that people with that kind of severe craving, they need residential treatment because they need to be able to cut out the triggers for cravings. So that's why residential treatment is offered. It's because you don't have the stimulation, the cueing, the prompts, the triggers, the reminders, the signaling, and your brain can rest. Well, I said to myself, the statistics were that over 80% of Americans are eating themselves to death because of these cravings. Well, you're not going to send 80% of Americans to residential treatment. So we had to find a way to cut out to do all that at home. And we did. January 1st, 2018, I had my first program over Zoom. We had 10 volunteers on the screen. The next week we had 10 paid members on the screen. And it worked because it was community. Now, I didn't know this when I was writing the textbook, but now I know, above the frontal lobe, above the cravings, is another layer of dominance of brain thinking. And it is the drive to fit in, to belong, to be normal, to be accepted. Humans cannot tolerate being abnormal. They're not designed to do that. There's a system of neurons all throughout the brain, everywhere, frontal lobe, midbrain, all throughout the brain. There are these very special brain cells called mirror neurons. And they're called that because they see something, they mirror it into the brain, and they stimulate the same brain cells as what they're seeing in another person. They make you copy behavior. They make you fit in. Because whether you're an evolutionist or a creationist, these two fields of thought have one central feature that is the same. And that is you must belong to a tribe to survive. So if you're an evolutionist, for 7 million years, if you as a human belong to a tribe, you lived. If you belong to a tribe that would cooperate and coordinate in defending you and helping you find food, water, shelter, and raise your children, you would live. Humans don't have fangs and claws and horns and big muscles to either, propel or run away. We don't have that. But what we do have is each other. And we can pick up rocks and we can throw them at a predator. And eventually we had spears and weapons and so on. We had to be in a group to keep that saber-toothed tiger from eating us, or to keep the neighboring tribe from capturing us and carrying us away. We had to be in a cooperative group of other people. If we were the loner and we wandered off, we would be somebody's lunch. We wouldn't even make it to the afternoon. Yeah. So this is still functioning. It's still the overwhelming drive in the human brain. And these food manufacturers are exploiting that right, left, and center. 73% of what Americans eat today is processed foods. So if you're going to fit in, you're going to eat processed foods and die. And if you don't fit in, your brain will drag you back. They're eating processed foods. Okay, let's stimulate processed food eating in ear brain too. It's not something that we have control over. So that's how I got here, Sherry. That's how I got here.
I love talking to you. I'm just so intrigued by your story and your just everything that you say. So, okay. So the standard American diet, the SAD diet today, is filled with that highly processed, low nutrient, cheap foods that you're talking about. You call them addictive food-like substances. Can you explain that and give the audience more details on the food industry and exactly what happened during the 1980s?
Yeah, yeah. I want everybody, every one of your listeners, if you're hearing this for the first time, just get ready. Because the guilt, the shame, the self-blame is just about to float away. Right, here we go. You guys heard in my bio, I have a Stanford MBA, 1978. I know. I just came back from my 45th reunion. But I'm very, very conscious of business models. And there is an addiction business model, because if you are selling a worthless, destructive product, the only way you can make a profit is if you can artificially build cravings in your customer's brain. And this is how that is done. So you hide there's the 5 A's of the addiction business model. You create an addictive product formulation. So what Sherry's talking about is in the mid-1980s, the tobacco industry, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, they bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods, the 3 largest food processors in the US, in 3 short years. Now you're starting to see, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Why would executives who make their money from addiction be moving into processed foods? And suddenly the light comes on as to what has happened to the world since the mid-1980s. So A number 1, addictive product formulation. Those executives hid nicotine in cigarettes, and now they're coming over to processed foods and they're hiding high fructose corn syrup in processed foods. High fructose corn syrup, salt, and fat. Now, this is key, so hold on to that. They hired a consultant named Howard Moskowitz, Harvard experimental psychology of marketing, PhD. And he went around to all the processed food manufacturers and secretly just filled those products to the maximum. That was his consulting value, was he could figure out the maximum amount of high fructose corn syrup, salt, and fat that he could put into a product without the consumer noticing. He went around to all of them. Now, that brings us to, so that's the first A. It's the 5 A's of the addiction business model. The first one is secret addictive substances hidden in the product. Here's another example. We have nicotine in cigarettes. We have high fructose corn syrup in processed foods. Here's another example, the alcohol industry. Oh, they sell these innocent wine coolers. Well, somebody actually went in and, it's only 8% alcohol or 12% alcohol. Somebody went in and actually measured how much alcohol in there. There's much more alcohol in those drinks than is on the label. They want the teenagers to use them often enough to actually develop the cravings and the addiction for it. It's diabolical. It's so depraved and soulless. Okay, but that's number 1, addictive product formulation. Number 2 is affordability. You have to be able to buy the product often enough to, first of all, establish the addiction, because it is repeat use that creates those intense cravings. Repeat use, you get a high and a crash. And in the crash, you're so miserable that you can't do anything until you get high again. That's the cravings. That's why cravings are so valuable. So you have this worthless, destructive product called a cigarette, and they bring all that technology over to worthless, destructive products called processed foods. So affordability for processed foods depended on high fructose corn syrup. Why did this happen in the mid-1980s? Because high fructose corn syrup came on the market in 1980. And that solved the affordability problem. Until that time, they knew that they could create these intense cravings because they had the experience of Hawaiian Punch in 1963. 1963, one of the tobacco companies got a hold of Hawaiian Punch and shifted it into a child's drink, and they could addict children to sugar, but they had to buy the sugar from the drug dealers in Florida, the sugar cartel. And the other tobacco executives said, no, 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 no. We know those people. We don't want to be dependent on them. But when high fructose corn syrup came along, they had a cheap sweetener, highly addictive. We have evidence that high fructose corn syrup goes through the body like corn alcohol. It elicits the same series of responses in the body. So they had number two. Now suddenly they had affordability. Number three is advertising. So they already had advertising budgets all over the world from selling tobacco, and they could just pile the processed food advertising on top. The price structure for advertising is steep volume discounts. So they could put their processed food advertising on top of their tobacco advertising and get it for very, very cheap and do a lot of it. Number four is availability. So remember, in the era, they were taking out the cigarette machines. Tobacco was being pounded in the courts finally. So they took out the cigarette vending machines and they put in the soda and snack machines. They converted all gas stations into drug dens, processed food outlets. If you ever go into one of those stores, quote unquote stores, they're actually drug dens, you will not find anything that's not addictive other than the water. The water will be the one non-addictive, non-craving product in there. Fast food outlets, they got this right, left, and center. And the country very soon became blanketed with availability. I know I went to work in a corporation in 1978. There was no food in the break room. There was coffee. There was tea if you were a wuss. And there was a water if you were really a wuss. And you could put creamer and sugar in the coffee. And that's what was available in a break room. And then you go into a break room in sort of the 2010 period. I had that prepared meal company and I was going into corporations. And the break rooms are just packed with processed foods, snacks. So the tobacco industry knew very well you got to make this available, easily available. And those huge packages of family size. So what that meant, if that huge package got into your house, it was available in your house for days and days. It's diabolical. Okay, so we've got affordability, advertising, availability, and then the last one, which is age of onset. If the younger you can addict a person, the more impossible it will be for them to stop the cravings. It's cravings. It's cravings. So, I mean, just like, this is so awful to listen to, but you've just got to hear it. How do I know the story that I'm about to tell? It's because the courts required the tobacco industry to put a lot of internal documents on file, and the depository is at University of California, San Francisco. And those researchers are going through those documents and they're creating the story of what happened. Here's what happened. So you might know about the Marlboro Country Store. That's a cravings process. So maybe you get a free pack of 3 cigarettes, which they used to give away a lot. That was enough to start the nicotine cravings in the reward centers in the brain. So now you're craving cigarettes and you think, oh, you see on your pack of cigarettes, you buy a pack and you say, oh, there's a coupon. Oh, what do I get for that coupon? Oh, if I save up enough coupons, I can get a Marlboro hat or a belt buckle or a lighter or a shirt or a jacket. Cool. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I'm going to be so cool. So you buy more cigarettes to get the coupons. And now you're intensifying those cravings. There's a high and a crash. And you need a cigarette about every 20 minutes. You are enslaved. The word addiction means to enslave. Okay, now you send in those coupons and you get your Marlboro logo item. That logo now has the power on its own, even if there are no cigarettes around, by association, that logo has the power to release those cravings. So now you're friggin' wearing the advertising. Okay, this is just so diabolical. It's really hard to talk about. They took that model, that's an addiction process, that's a cravings process. They took that exact model and they created the wacky warehouse for Kool-Aid. And Hawaiian Punch had one too. What was the guy's name? Punchy's Warehouse or something. Where children, if you bought enough packets of Kool-Aid, which is just sugar, colored and flavored, and sugar is more addictive and craving than cocaine or heroin, according to some research. Now you could do that with small children. And they did. They did. Millions of small children, millions of children drank the Kool-Aid and became intense cravers of sugar. That's what
And then
happened.
they added the food coloring. The red number 40s, the green number 3s, the mhm.
It was so diabolical. It's really hard to talk about because
Mhm.
a child who's craving sugar, so that is what's dominating their brain. Now, as children, they're supposed to be learning life skills. They're supposed to be learning to go to bed on time and to take care of themselves and learn how to manage relationships and be kind to people and connect with people and learn history and math and reading. But nope, those the food processors, General Foods, oh no, they put their profits first and the child's well-being way. I mean, just it didn't even make the list.
Mm. You know, when you talked about the high fructose corn syrup, which is sweeter than sugar, they loved it because it was cheaper. They could
Mm,
use it. It didn't
mm,
cost them as much,
mm.
and they didn't have to put sugar on the label.
And high fructose corn syrup converts to fat 2.5 times more readily than sugar. So when Coca-Cola found out about this is all out of a book called Sugar, Fat, Salt by Michael Moss.
Great book.
Oh, terrifying. I had to read that book, the first half 1 year, and I had to wait before I could read the second half. So Coca-Cola does this research on the conversion of high fructose corn syrup to fat internally, doesn't publish it, learns that it converts to fat very readily. And what do they do in response? They replace sugar in all their Coke products with high fructose corn syrup and double their budget, their advertising budget, so that they can get the users of 2 cans a day up to 4 servings a day.
Wow.
And the Coca-Cola belt, which is now called the obesity belt, through the South, from Texas over to North Carolina, it became the Coca-Cola belt became the obesity belt.
Mm.
It's not
Wow.
hard to figure out what happened.
It's crazy.
It's the sickest thing. So sick.
So you talked a little bit about how the brain craves the food, which was a light bulb for me when you talked about the prefrontal cortex not getting the nutrients that it's stuck back here. And that causes the brain fog, the forgetfulness, the memory. That's a light bulb.
Attention, all the things that go on in the frontal lobe are attention span.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got epidemics of attention deficit,
Mm-hmm.
learning,
Yes.
and we have epidemics of learning difficulties, problem solving and decision making, and we have epidemics of poor decision making, memory, and we have
Mm-hmm.
epidemics of dementia and Alzheimer's, and impulse control. And we have
Mm-hmm.
epidemics of poor impulse control. And Americans are eating 70% of their food in processed foods.
Mm-hmm.
73%. You see numbers of 64% based on the NOVA scale. But the NOVA scale, amazingly, does not include flour as a processed food. You have to go into the detail of the studies, the data, and take the flour out of unprocessed, amazingly, and put it up here with the processed foods, and you get from about 63% to 74%, 73%.
Can you explain for the viewers what the Nova scale is?
I really don't want to.
No? Okay. Never mind then.
No,
So,
but I will.
okay.
But let me explain
So,
why I don't want to. So
okay.
the NOVA scale is ultra processed, processed, and minimally processed foods. But it's like, and so they say that if you make things at home with minimally processed foods, it's okay. No, it's like saying if you make your meth at home, it's much better than what you buy on the street. Well, that might be true, but that's not helpful. Okay, so it's all processed. Once it's made into a powder or a crystal or a liquid or a syrup or a mush, it's processed. And why is that the key thing? It's because plants have natural endorphins in them. This is well established around the world, research done around the world. Edible plants have natural endorphins. It's great. You're attracted to plants that give you a little buzz. And that's fine. That's not enough endorphin to make you high and crash. It's enough endorphin to create this nice little feeling of satisfaction. And so you go back to that plant, it's nourishing, and you thrive. Well, when you process it, what are those processors doing? Those addiction merchants, those craving sellers of cravings, you're concentrating the endorphin.
Mm.
So that now there's enough endorphin, and when you powder or crystallize or make liquid or make syrup out of it, there's no digestion process, so it gets into the system all at once. And that's enough to get a high, because the key is if you get a high, it's going to be followed by a crash. And then the cravings will drag you back to that product. So again, just like cigarettes are a worthless, destructive, just agonizingly awful, sickening,
Mm-hmm.
disease-carrying product. But why would anyone? Well, first of all, deceptive advertising. Oh, they're rebellious, they're sexy, they're masculine, they're
Mm-hmm.
sophisticated. So you got to have the deceptive advertising there.
Yeah.
But people went back to them because of the cravings. Processed foods are now exactly in that category of product, except they're much more intensely craving. And because we start them so much earlier, they weren't allowed to market cigarettes to 2-year-olds, but they sure could market high fructose corn syrup to 2-year-olds. and they're everywhere and they're intensely advertised. They are killing now 1.6 million Americans a year, which is 4 times higher than the COVID rate. But why don't you see the newspapers screaming headlines? It's because you open that newspaper and there are processed food advertisements in it. So we
So
got to rely on people like Sherry. Yay, Sherry.
thank you, Dr. Joan. Yeah, we getting this message out, and that is why I love to have you on here because I mean, you're right. You're one of 2 women with PhDs
Mm,
in this area.
mm.
Do I remember that correctly?
Oh, in food addiction, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Kathleen Day Mason is the other one. She wrote
Yep.
Potatoes, Not Prozac.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's only 2, and you're one of them. So now let's talk about, you said anything that is powdered, crystalled. Now, I think about when you were talking about that, I was thinking about how some people like to use cassava flour, spelt flour. Does it not matter? It's all flours.
Yeah. Once it's been turned, I mean, just think about heroin and cocaine. They're sold as powders,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So it's the concentrating. So let's go through all the different kinds of processed foods. Any kind of sweetener is going to kick up those cravings. It happens the moment it hits the taste bud, and the time lapse between it hitting the taste bud and creating that dopamine release is one of the fastest in the drug world. And that's one of the ways you measure the addictive potential of a substance. How fast does it activate that? And sugar's like the fastest. Flour activates the serotonin pathway. It's one of the few drugs that do. But the real culprit in flour is the gluten, because in the United States, the gluten content of wheat flour is like twice what it is elsewhere in the world, due to some hybridization programs to try to increase the yield on the stalk. Well, gluten is the full name of the active substance is gluteomorphine. It's one of the plant endorphins, naturally lovely occurring plant endorphins, which makes it pleasant to eat. But when you double the amount of gluten in the plant, and then you grind it into a powder, you take out all the fibers so it will be absorbed all at once. Now, most people are sensitive to gluten. If you have depression, actually, the crashing from the gluten could be a factor there. That's in the research. Okay, next is excessive salt. We know that excessive salt is a problem because of research done in Florida in a morphine recovery clinic. So the morphine addicted people came in and their residents there. The researcher who discovered this noticed that they were like taking the tops off the salt and just pouring the salt onto their food. So there's a salt withdrawal that's similar to a morphine withdrawal. Next category is dairy. Dairy is naturally processed by the cow to have 4 different kinds of casomorphine in it. Now, this is Mother Nature at work. That casomorphine is supposed to be there. It's in all mammal breast milk. It's in your mother's milk. It's in your breast milk. Why? Because when a baby mammal feeds, the Mother Nature wants that baby to go to sleep right away. So it'll just lie there and absorb nutrients. It doesn't want it running around and using nutrients for other things. It wants it to go to sleep. So just think about this for a minute. A mother cow, this is raw, organic milk coming right out of the mother's cow. She's already set it up to have so much morphine in it that a 100-pound baby calf will go to sleep It's enough to put out a 100-pound animal. So, those addiction merchants, those craving merchants, like, great, let's concentrate this into cheese. Let's put casein in everything. So whenever I think about this, I think about, okay, poppies are not a problem. Lots of people grow poppies. But when you extract the opiate and concentrate it into a hash,
Yeah.
then you got a drug.
Yeah.
So I think about that when I see concentrated milk that's been concentrated into cheese. And then there's excessive fat. So you got to eat salt. It's excessive salt. You have to eat fats. It's excessive fats. They activate the same pathway as cannabis. We've got really good research on that now. And then caffeine, and then food additives. And you put those all together, and you've got all four of the major craving pathways, the pleasure pathways. Are all, surging and crashing and surging and crashing all day long. And that's what people are most desperate about these days, is just to stop the battle in their heads.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about sugars, right, that includes all the artificials and maple syrup and honey, correct?
Carbonado sugar, natural brown sugar, light brown sugar.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are at least 100 names for sugars on labels now.
Exactly. Yep. And I often talk to people, even friends and family, and they'll be like, "But I'm drinking the diet soda." And then I quickly explain to them how that still raises their insulin,
Yeah,
affects their brain, even though it's 0 calorie, no
yeah.
sugar, but
The
it
whole
affects
calorie
their
thing
brain.
is the biggest scam ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True that. So we want to go off of all of these processed foods, right? How do you avoid the relapse? The biggest,
You have to get into a group.
the
So the
community.
mirror
Okay.
neurons are the
Mhm.
spoiler. If the mirror neurons are on the side of processed food consumption, they're going to keep activating the cravings. But if the mirror neurons are on the side of clean food, they will activate the frontal lobe, and you'll be able to think your way out of cravings. And that is why our programs are designed exactly the way they're designed. So we broadcast, for example, over Zoom 15 hours a day in blocks, 5 hours in a break, 3 hours in a break, around the clock. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, you can open your screen and be among like-minded people. You activate your mirror neurons and say, no, 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 I know I feel like binging, but my tribe doesn't binge. We don't get up in the middle of the night. Thank you guys for being here and going to sleep. So if you're in New York, you might wake up and hear the Australians. If you're in the UK,
Mhm.
you might wake up and hear hear the South Africans, but somebody in your tribe will be on that screen, or you can get a video out of the library, and I will help you through a video. So that's the key thing. You cannot do this by yourself. You cannot do this when you're around people who are eating processed foods. That spoiler, the mirror neurons, they will either drag you to your death and illness, or they will drag you to a thriving life, because they will copy the people around you. If you're around people eating processed foods and sick, you'll have that kind of life. If you're around clean eaters, even if they're on a screen, it works great. Clean eaters, vibrant life, great purpose in life, clear head, lots of satisfying activities. You will do that too. And because of Zoom, it's really easy. I tell people, if you can watch TV, you can be successful in our program. If you
Mhm.
can listen to the radio, you can be successful in our program, because your mirror neurons will swing over and start to copy healthy behavior.
So there's someone on there monitoring that all day.
15 hours a day, live on the Zoom screen. There are other
Yeah.
people monitoring our Facebook group. There are small
Hmm.
groups assigned to an advocate, and then there are specialty groups, so you get even more like-minded people. There's a daily podcast. There's a daily newsletter by email. There's a big library. There are these small
Hmm.
private messenger groups, and then there are the chats and calls 15 hours a
Hmm.
day.
Amazing. What such great support, Joan.
It works.
Wow.
It works. I spent those
Yeah.
22 years trying 14 different major things that totally didn't work until I got to Zoom, and I had a method for safely directing that urge to belong. And I did the research. I saw, oh, that's the dominant force in the brain. That's the highest level of survival.
Hmm.
That is going to preempt anything else the advertisers can do. Just works. And it's not expensive. Do you mind if I tell you what it costs?
Go right ahead.
It's $59 a month. I mean, people save 10 times that from not having, binging on processed foods.
Hmm.
And it's easy and it's really fun. You get 152 life management skills because it helps if you can sleep well and be in non-stressful relationships. Control your thoughts, control your emotions, control your behaviors. Control the amount of food stimulation that reaches your brain. So it's really fun. It's just fun.
And I love that they can hop on the community anytime they need to.
Well, this is because this is the other barrier. We're busy. A lot of people are busy.
Yeah.
This doesn't require any time because you're playing it in the background while you're fixing your food, while you're running the vacuum, while you're waiting for the kids, while you're driving to work. A lot of companies, if you can do it, they'll let you put on headphones and listen to something while you work. So it doesn't require any time. Your behavior just evolves, and what you're thinking about doing changes with no effort. All you have to do is get
Mm,
enough messaging around your head to persuade your mirror neurons that you're in a new tribe.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's so fun. You can imagine after 22 years how excited I was to find something that works.
I
And
think
we've
it's
had it now for
amazing.
6 years. We
Yeah.
now have a training so you can train to be an advocate.
Mhm.
And we now, because we saw so many different diseases go into remission, we have a whole separate remission community at
Mhm.
remissionoptimistic.com. And that's where you get other training in healing modalities like meditation and visualization and hot cold therapy and
Oh,
breath work and all
all of,
those
yeah.
things that work really well.
So, what's your biggest advice for people, for the audience, for overcoming the addiction to processed food?
Get in a clean eating group. Easily easy to
Okay.
access, affordable, so you can do it for the rest of your life.
Hmm.
As soon as you leave your safe environment, your mirror neurons will swing right over and grab onto the do you know that 97% of people in the US have a diagnosis of some kind now? Yeah.
That
It's
is
just like, oh, they're sick. Okay, we'll be sick too. So you got
cool.
to be able to do this for the long term and get into the right group. Surround yourself. Make sure the
Hmm.
5 people you see the most in the day are eating clean.
Hmm. Otherwise, you're going to end up with the chronic conditions, the diseases that everyone else has because they're eating all the high processed foods.
It's so
Hmm.
simple. When you understand what is the dominant force in the brain, the
Hmm.
dominant force is to be normal, to fit in. to
Mm-hmm.
belong, to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Once you know that that's the dominant force, then you know that who you're around is going to determine the quality of your life.
And that is so true because when you're trying to make changes, but you're still hanging out with the same people that are still doing the same things, and they're, why aren't you drinking? Why aren't you eating that? What are you doing? There's a lot of
What's
questions, and
what's wrong with you? You could have one bite if you
Mhm.
wanted it. I made it just for you. Don't you like me
Mhm.
anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom today, Joan.
Oh, sure. It's so
You
much fun to
are
be here. Thank you so
you are
much.
just so amazing. So
All
you have
right.
a free video for the viewers.
I do.
The
I forget what I offered you, but I would like to
food.
offer
Oh, go
the
ahead.
video I made this morning, which is Dr. Jones' 10 weight loss secrets. It's a brand
Oh,
new video. I just made it this morning. I've been working on it for a couple of weeks. And if you would like that one, I'll send you whatever I said I was going to send you, but I'll send you that one too.
I was gonna say, let's do them both. They get two
Yeah.
freebies from you
What was
because
the
you
other one I
just
said I'd send?
food addiction mission video.
Super. Super.
So, and you just did the other videos this morning. You just
Yeah. Yeah. Your
recorded
audience
them.
got it first.
Yeah, so you viewers, you will get two freebies from Dr. Joan. That the link will be below the video here for you, along with her website, her social medias, how to get a hold of her. So, and anything else you would like to say to the viewers before we sign off?
Just adore Sherry. Just adore her. Remember that she's the one that brought you out of this. She's the one that created a pathway for you. So
Mhm.
just remember her. Remember her in your will. Leave her lots of money.
Well, if one speaker can bring across one message that helps to change the health and life of one viewer, that's all I want.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sherry. You're wonderful.
thank you. So for those of you tuning in, be sure to tune back in for the rest of the Weight Loss for Women Over 50 Masterclass series. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Joan Ifland. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Ditto.